Trade talks around Flames forward Sam Bennett appears to be heating up. The Senators are still trying to move some of their veteran players. Plus, we also have an update on Keith Yandle, who's still likely to be traded. Plus, we have some news on injuries, waivers, and the COVID protocols as well. All that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, we have a real big variety of news here to talk about today. Kick things off with a couple quick tidbits. First up, former NHL player, I guess we can call him that now, former longtime Red Wing, Justin Abdelkader, who was bought out of his contract this past offseason by Detroit, is going to continue his playing career. However, as most of you probably know, he did not get a contract for the NHL this year, so he's going to continue his hockey journey over in Europe. He's accepted a contract with a Swiss team and will play out the remainder of the season over there. Hard to say what happens beyond that, but I think it's probably fair to say that his NHL career at this point is over, and we'll see how long he decides to play in Europe before he hangs him up and calls it a career. Now, another quick update as well. Youngster Morgan Frost of the Philadelphia Flyers, his season is over. We had previously reported that he was injured, was going to be out sometime. Well, the Flyers got a fairly big blow that he needs surgery to repair the dislocation in his shoulder, and he's going to be out for several months. So his season effectively is over. I mean, the former first-round pick of 2017, still trying to get a regular spot in the NHL. Certainly still appears to have a bright future, but injuries can take their toll on the body, and well, hopefully this doesn't set back the youngster too much. I still think he's a potential dynamic player at the NHL level. Of course, we had some news on the NHL waiver wire as well. Yesterday, we saw the Senators place veteran defenseman Braydon Coburn on waivers. He did, in fact, clear. No big surprise. Obviously he hasn't played well, but he does only have 1 year left on his contract. I thought maybe there might be a chance somebody would take him off their hands, but that did not happen. So he clears. He's been assigned to the taxi squad effectively. So the Senators were able to bring up Eric Brandstrom, who's making his season debut tonight for the Ottawa Senators against the Montreal Canadiens. So certainly nice to see the youngster get his opportunity. He likely would have been brought in sooner. I know a lot of Senators fans were unhappy with the fact he wasn't playing, but given the fact he was playing over in the Swiss League and had to come over in quarantine and really didn't get a whole lot of practice and camp time, they really wanted to get him some time here. So effectively he's been practicing with the AHL group and trying to get himself ready to go. So obviously they had a long road trip that they're just coming to the tail end of now in Montreal tonight, then they go back home. The plan really has been for some time to either bring him in either for this game or when they return to Ottawa. So hopefully he gets an extended look here and can get his NHL career on track, considering he was the prime piece coming back in that Mark Stone trade to the Vegas Golden Knights. Of course, as I mentioned in an earlier video today, in case you missed it, I'll link it in the YouTube cards, but we've had more games postponed. The Minnesota Wild have been shut down for some time. We saw the NHL announce earlier, which I already discussed in that video as well, talking about some new updated enhanced protocols, and we've already had a change to those protocols since that video came out. A lot of NHL players were not happy with the fact that they were only able to arrive at the game an hour and 45 minutes ahead of schedule due to their routines and how they like to, prep themselves. So they've actually been able to change the rule back that they can arrive anytime, but it cannot be for prep time. And there's some weird language in the rule, but players are going to be allowed to arrive earlier if they wish. There was already an exception there if they were going to see one of the team's therapists or something to get treatment on an injury. Quick update on the Penguins general manager search. A couple of guys that we can rule out, which I believe we mentioned one of them yesterday. Chris Drury, the Rangers, who's expected to be a leading contender, has taken himself out of the mix, even though the Rangers were willing to give him permission and we're not going to hold him back. So that's unfortunate for Pittsburgh, one of the top contenders for the job out. And also former Penguin assistant GM Jason Botterill, who they requested permission from Seattle to speak with, has been denied. So Botterill just took a job with the Kraken, not a huge surprise. As I'd mentioned in a prior video talking about GM candidates, obviously I had a feeling they may not allow him to look at that considering how new and the fact he's just been there like a few weeks now. So it's unfortunate for him in a way, because if he wouldn't have taken that job, he probably also would have been a leading contender for that GM role, considering how long he was with the organization as an assistant. But not to be. So those two guys are out, and it's also believed that Ron Hextall, a former GM of the Flyers, as well as NHL Network analyst Kevin Weeks have both had virtual type interviews with the Penguins for their vacant GM job, and several more guys are going to expected to do that here in the coming days. As I mentioned, like John Ferguson Jr. of the Bruins, Mike Futa, who's working for Sportsnet, former assistant GM with the Los Angeles Kings, is in the mix, as well as several other former executives. So we'll have to see how the Penguins decide to proceed here, but unfortunately for them, a couple big names are off the list. And of course, as we talked about before, there was a lot of speculation about Keith Yandle to start the Florida Panthers NHL season, and he was going to be traded, that the Panthers were threatening to help him lose his Ironman streak, keep him as a healthy scratch, and they weren't happy with his play. And obviously, as I mentioned, I thought a lot of that was kind of a tactic, waive his no trade clause to get them to move him, which they weren't happy with having his salary on their books right now. But I think there's a little bit more to it. There's more reports from Panthers insider George Richards indicating that he feels that part of this is also to do with the Seattle expansion draft, which also makes a lot of sense. Obviously, where he has a full no move, they would be forced to protect him in the upcoming draft, which means they'd have to leave one of their other younger, less expensive defensemen exposed that they probably wouldn't rather do. So clearly that's in the mix here as well. And I think it's also fair to say, given how the Panthers are looking to cut cost, that obviously they're not crazy about his contract and the fact that his defensive play wasn't going along with the offense he was producing. So overall, I think it's still quite widely expected that we do see a Yandle trade. I mean, he was previously linked to a team like the Flyers, Islanders, and Bruins were the main ones that were reportedly having conversations around potentially acquiring him. Ultimately, he's got full control. We'll have to approve whatever deal does indeed end up taking place, if it does. No guarantee, since he has that power and that control in his contract, but it obviously makes sense that there's a lot more to it here than just his defensive play in his contract. So, I mean, obviously a lot of teams are going to be making moves here with Seattle expansion in mind. And of course, as we mentioned yesterday as well, Derek Stepan of the Ottawa Senators appears to be on his way out of town, even though he's only arrived a short time ago. The Senators acquired him near the end of training camp, and he's only been there a short time. But it appears as though they're obviously not happy with his play. He hasn't been very good for them. They tried to put him into a top six role early on. That wasn't working out. He's dropped down to the fourth line. I think it's only a matter of time, probably, before he becomes a healthy scratch and possibly even goes on waivers if a trade can't be found. And obviously they'll see, allow them to give their youngsters more opportunity. They tried to bring in some veteran players. They're going to give them a little bit more stability and kind of insulate those young guys a little bit, but they didn't really bring in good quality players. They might be good people, might be good leaders, but they're just not really all that good on the ice anymore. Stepan's a prime example of that. Fortunately for the Senators, he's in his final year of his contract, so they're not stuck with him for too long. But it's also being reported, with his role being reduced, that there's a bit of a conflict between himself and head coach DJ Smith, that they're not really much of a fan of each other. Hard to say if that's true or not, but even if it is or it isn't, his play hasn't been good. They're not happy with it. They'd like to be able to find somebody to take him on. Obviously, his wife had just had a baby as well, which also delayed him getting to Ottawa. He has a young family, so he's not really able to see his wife and kids right now, which is certainly tough, and that could play a role in his unhappiness as well. And it might be a situation here where they're trying to maybe do him a favor and move him to a team that's going to be closer to be able to see his family more. Now, lastly, here I want to talk about Calgary Flames forward Sam Bennett, who's going to be a healthy scratch tonight, and that's gotten the media around the Flames all kind of hyped up that a potential trade is imminent or getting close. And I am going to caution you that I'm not sure that's the case, but I do think it means that trade talks are indeed heating up. Listening to some of the NHL insiders, like Darren Dreger, for example, tonight on Insider Trading, even confirmed that he doesn't think a deal is really real close, but it certainly means that trade talks have heated up. We heard the same thing earlier from Elliot Friedman of Sportsnet, indicating that they all kind of feel that it's an indication that trade talks are definitely progressing. I mean, Sam Bennett, as of late, has been elevated to the top line, actually been playing pretty decent, so it seems weird he would go from that to a healthy scratch. So maybe they're just protecting the asset and kind of go from there to see that, they don't want anything to happen before a trade doesn't. Friedman also went on to say that when the Saturday headlines happened last weekend and it was revealed that Bennett and Victor Mete both had requested trades, both general managers had come out afterwards and denied the fact that they knew anything about it. And like as I mentioned before, I caution you what GMs say, because they're quite often not going to reveal full details or the truth, because they really don't have to, and they really don't want teams to know what they're working on. So clearly there's that aspect of it. In this case, though, I do kind of believe the fact that they really were a little bit blindsided and upset over this, because their agent, Darren Ferris, who represents both of these players here, obviously didn't really have discussions with the GMs prior to going public with the Sportsnet insiders here on Johnson and Friedman. So obviously to them it was a bit of a surprise. So in the case of the Flames, Friedman says basically what happened was, it's believed that GM Brad Treliving met with Sam Bennett after this information came out, discussed the situation, told him to take a couple days and think things over and get back to him, and now they believe that he's kind of told him himself that he would like a change of scenery. So now that that's a little bit more official, he's heard it directly from the player that they're working more closely on a deal. There was rumored to be teams like Toronto and New Jersey having interest. Well, hard to say exactly how serious that interest is. We know that the Devils are a team right now that are kind of battling a lot of other stuff when it comes to COVID. Toronto's been rumored for some time to be wanting to make an upgrade in their bottom part of their forward group. So as much as, they might have interest, I'm not sure Sam Bennett would be truly happy there in a sense, given that he's not going to be given a very big role. Their top six is already pretty full, and if anything, he would probably be a fourth line player for them. So, it might help the Leafs. I'm not sure it really helps Sam Bennett, but we will see. At this point, Bennett doesn't have a lot of say over where he's traded, given that he doesn't have that in his contract, doesn't have any trade protection. So we will see, but given the fact that he's going to be a healthy scratch tonight, it's certainly a situation where many feel a deal is getting close and there's lots of conversations happening, and that they're basically keeping him out to protect the asset. Eric Francis of Sportsnet, who covers the Flames, said he can't say for sure that Bennett has played his last game as a Flame, but if he is sat out for another healthy scratch on the weekend for the Battle of Alberta against the Oilers, at that point, it's probably safe to say that he won't be back, and he'll likely be sat out until he is traded. Another player I know in Vancouver too, Jake Virtanen, was getting some attention as maybe being on the trade block as well after being sat out earlier, not that long ago. So, maybe that's a situation where teams would kind of revisit that. I know at one point there was talk about maybe a swap. I don't know if there's interest there, if that makes sense for both clubs, but another guy to maybe keep your eye on here as the season moves forward. So let me know your thoughts here on all these potential trade speculations and the other news and rumors we talked about today, and we can discuss further down in the comments. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.